Hi, everybody. This is Warren Herman, and today what I want to talk to you about is a way of understanding this kind of model of what is going on in the church, what is going on in the world right now, and how we can really come to an understanding of it so we can gain a sense of, what this did for me was give me a sense of what's happening in the church so that I could have some peace, know what my place in the church was. It gave me some of these things, and it's hard, to try to figure this out because there's so many different voices in the church right now. There's so many different voices that are pulling us in different directions, telling us, okay, we have to do this or that. There's this problem, this is the way the church crisis is. I think that this perspective, which I'm going to call the reconciliation and conquest model, can help us to really make some progress. And the reason why I think this, in my own journey, in a way I was kind of immunized against the way in which I might get lost in integrating things in an improper way, was because I spent a lot of my time early in my spiritual development in the New Age movement, which is all about, kind of integrating or bringing about this unity in a kind of a false way. And I was very open to all different kinds of religions, but seeing them through this incorrect light and being open to these outside ideologies. I really had a lot of experience being exposed to and living in ideologies that were outside the church. So I feel like that immunized me against those ideologies. So I know not to go into them fully. I know not to take them as the frame of reference. And so that allows me to then kind of plunder these sources of information and techniques in service to the church's tradition, because I'm kind of immunizing and saying, okay, this is, I don't say, oh, it's so great, because I've been there, I've been in it, I've used it as the frame of reference. I now know the Catholic Church and its understanding and its principles have to be the frame of reference, and then I can go in and descend into the outside ideology, take out the techniques and ideas, and they can be up-leveled and reworked, and they can become part of the tradition. So we want to understand that what this is really about is a sense of enhancing tradition rather than exchanging tradition for an outside ideology. That's the important distinction, because in a modernist kind of conception, we exchange the ideas of the tradition for these outside ideologies, these psychological explanations, these different other inventive theories of theology that are outside of the norms of the church. And so we don't want to do that, but we want to take new ideologies and we want to modify them to enhance the tradition. And in the same way, we want to enrich the tradition. We don't want to impoverish it by just picking up these outside ideologies. We don't want to say, okay, we're not going to do works of mercy, we're going to do social justice. We're saying, no, let's figure out how to do works of mercy on a grand scale, and that'll we'll kind of take these social justice techniques of marches and demonstrations and let's put them into a wider context. Let's modify them. Let's understand them. Let's do like what Mother Teresa said. She says, I won't go to I think she said, I won't go to an anti-war rally, but when you have a peace rally, invite me. It's like these different, there's these understandings of, we don't want to impoverish our tradition by just taking on these other cultural movements and other types of things, but we want to enrich it. And so the thing is, we could also, if we were in a traditionalist mindset, we can reject everything. We could say, okay, everything's bad. We can try to hold off on anything that is, not a traditional thing. So we might say, okay, we don't want anything that's like what Dorothy Day did with the Catholic worker movement. We might say we don't want anything that looks anything like social justice. We don't want anything that looks anything like these things. So we reject anything. We can completely reject, the charismatic movement, any type of looking at techniques from other religions. We can kind of reject it entirely. But what we want to do instead is, to take on this attitude. You don't want to replace, the church's traditional spirituality with some type of, for example, a Buddhist meditation. But we want to take the different things that are outside and we want to rework them so that they can be then used in harmony with what was originally done in the tradition. So that this is really important to realize that this is, I believe, the real actual nature of the church. The church, Christ takes on flesh. This Hebrew tradition takes on the Roman Empire, and its trappings as becomes the Catholic Church. we see St. Thomas, takes on the pagan philosophy of Aristotle and reworks it so that it becomes part of the tradition. We're doing the same thing. We're just understanding this on a grand scale. That in the crisis of the Church post-Vatican II, this is something that's happening on such a grand scale that it's such a huge digestion that everybody looks sick. We bit off more than we could chew, it seems, because that could be a way of looking at it. So we understand what the problem is in the Church. And we understand what we need to do, which is to help rework all the ideologies of the world so they expand tradition. And so, we could see this type of thing, that we want to understand that these things, if we rework these ideologies, they can become a natural reinforcement for what the Church has always said. They can, for example, if I take elements of even this is kind of in harmony with what the letter to the bishops on some aspects of Christian meditation teaches. Like if I take some elements of how to focus my mind in Buddhism, and I apply that to some elements, I could take a few deep breaths to relax. That might actually help my ability to pray. That document says, we can maybe use some of these things as a preparation. There's lots of technicality of how to talk about any one of these things and how we would redeem it. But there's a chance that we might be able to find a natural reinforcement to our original traditional techniques. Our original traditional approaches can get natural reinforcement. So the thing is, what we don't want to do is get naturalistic replacements. We don't want to get this to become, and just like that book, that document says, we don't want to have someone, I take a few deep breaths and then I have such a consolation, I think I'm close to God. No, that's a natural consolation. We don't want to do these things and get these naturalistic replacements. Now, the thing is, too, we hear a lot of talk when we're trying to understand the Church crisis about infiltration. And the thing is, we have to remember that really there can be a sense in which the Church is infiltrated, but that infiltration is permitted, I believe, as part of God's attempt to filtrate the world. To understand that this is about, an expedition of the tradition. This is what we're supposed to do. The expedition of the tradition is to filtrate the world. There might be the sedition of the infiltration, is to bring these ideologies in the Church. But it's the same thing, I believe, as the logic of the crucifixion. Christ is surrounded by his enemies. He opens his arms. They seem to kill him. It's the same thing that happens, I believe, to the Church post-Vatican II. And this is what people have said, that this is almost like the mystical passion of the Church. But I think what we're missing is the idea that this mystical passion is bringing about the reconciliation of all things, just like Christ's crucifixion. And that we participate in the reconciliation of all things by reworking ideologies so that we get these new things that can help support us. And we end up, with this emphasis of the Church. The traditional Church is very vertical. It understands. We see, for example, in the traditional Latin Mass, we see that, the focus is ad orientem, toward the altar, focusing on Christ, our honoring of God, and all that. And we see, in the new Mass, we see this kind of versus populum. The priest faces the people. And what we don't want to have happen is we don't want this to become a shift in our mind where it becomes, either we're focused on God or we're focused on the people. Either we're focused on our social relationships or we're focused on worship. We don't want there to be a dichotomy. But what we do want there to be, and I believe we're called to do post-Vatican II, is to kind of have this vertical and somewhat circular type of thing going on. There's this way in which we're supposed to be kind of reaching out and catching everything, kind of bringing everything back in so that it can fulfill its vertical purpose and kind of, there's a way of kind of bringing these things together. So that's something else that we can see here. The other thing is we want to really understand, it's kind of like there's this, orderly, thing we used to have where there's, the Church and its ideologies. We could say there's this beautiful garden, and then there's these brambles and all this mess. And instead we can think about it what we're trying to do now is cultivate those other lands, those other things, those other types of ideologies. At the beginning we have, the Church kind of progresses through these phases, which I believe actually correspond to parts of the human person. And we begin by redeeming things like the philosophy of Aristotle, these intellectual philosophies. But we can go further. We can kind of progress toward reclaiming philosophies that are primarily based on emotions, consciousness, these other faculties that we may not have yet redeemed. And so there's this real necessity there that can allow us to move forward and capture these other things. Because the interesting thing is, there's a quote in the book of Saint it's Father Anthony de Mello's book Sadhana, where he talks about how to redeem Eastern practices. And the thing is really that when Anthony de Mello speaks about these things, I don't really necessarily like the way he expresses them, because they can be they can give too much of the expression that these too Hinduized, and sometimes when he talks about it. But the thing is that there is an element in which there's a quote in there that says the early church, had redeemed some ideologies, but the church of the future might be more like Buddhist and might be more like Hindu. Well, the thing is, I don't believe that it's because the church is becoming weirder. I believe it because it's the process of the incarnation needs to continue, where we need to keep reconciling more and more ideologies into harmony with the tradition, like a chain reaction, like a chemical reaction throughout all human ideology. And so this principle of the incarnation needs to filter through all these different things. And I believe also it's the principle of the Immaculate Conception, because I believe that through Mary, just like Christ came into the world through Mary, he was the incarnate Word. We need to get the purification of all concepts. We need to get these incarnate more words, so to speak, as everything gets really added into the fabric of the tradition. And the thing is, everything's getting ordered as if it's like, I mentioned just a little bit a while ago, like this orderly little garden of tradition, and now there's all these wild lands, and we want to be progressing to bring order to these other lands so that they point us back toward this garden, so that becomes part of the same park, so to speak, just maybe a different ring of the same park. And it allows us to reclaim, okay, we reclaimed Aristotle, okay, then we can reclaim this, okay, we can reclaim Protestantism, okay, we can reclaim this. We can find the good in these things, and we can change them and modify them so that we get all the best elements and all the different ways of doing things that might be good in any of the traditions or religions of the world, or ideologies, and we bring them in, and we rework them, and we reorient them, and change their context, and change their meaning, just like St. Thomas did to Aristotle. We do that to everything, pretty much. Probably you could do that to almost anything except like overt Satanism. It's like that's probably, you could pretty much do that to anything. So here's the thing, and we end up having these things of this, like we get that through Mary we want these ideologies. Why do we do this? We do this because there are two problems. We have the problem of, are we united to Christ? But we also have the problem that we are weak. And the reason why we reclaim these ideologies is to expand, it's to really strengthen our created nature, because these ideologies have like a fixation in our created nature. Like Freud might think a lot about the mind in a certain way. He fixated there, so he kind of, it's like a man who's blind. He develops other senses, and it's like we become both a blind person. We get the enhanced senses of a blind person added to the being a sighted person, in a sense. That this is a metaphor. I'm not judging people who are blind. This is a thing. Like, so we get this enhanced senses because we want to be more like the Immaculate Conception, so we can better bear the light of Christ. And so this is the purpose of this whole thing. This whole project is to strengthen our created nature, so we can better bear what is of Christ. And this allows us to, and we don't do this merely in a superficial way, like we just kind of add things hodgepodge. We actually really transform these things. We don't refuse the entry of these things that are trying to infiltrate the church. We reform those things so that they become united to Christ. And we don't have this reductionist understanding. We have this understanding that we want to elaborate the tradition. And that's really some ways we can look at this, and that's another way we can think about these things, and that can help us try to understand what's going on in the church today.